Penny bells, penny all the way. Oh, what fun it is to have a penny subscriber today. Hey! Thank you, Penny, for the suggestion for this video. Welcome to another episode of Trying Not to Starve to Death on Good Home Cooking. I'm Amy. And Penny's question was, how do you make no-bake cookies that aren't dry and crumbly? And I thought, well, I can give her a few suggestions on how to make no-bake cookies that aren't dry and crumbly, but what I really started thinking about was the whole no-bake cookie thing, and I'm like, well, no-bake cookies, they're kind of just fudge that you add oatmeal to. I mean, that is really why everybody loves them, because it's fudge. You add oatmeal to it. And so I thought, I wonder if I were to make some fudge and add oatmeal to it and then make some regular no-bake cookies, which one would I like better? Like, I'm just super curious. The most likely reason why your no-bake cookies are dry and crumbly is because you are heating the butter and sugar at too high of a temperature or for too long, or both. I do recommend measuring out your oats beforehand. And part of the reason is because there comes a certain point in the recipe where there's a little bit of a time crunch, where you have a certain amount of time to get it mixed in and get it out on the your little wax paper before it cools off. And that time crunch, if you aren't sensitive to that time crunch, then it can affect how your cookies turn out. And I also put out my wax paper beforehand because, again, we have that time crunch point where we have the hot liquid mixture that you mix with the oats, and you have to get them out onto your wax paper before it cools off. Here we go, on into the no-bakes. The first part of the no-bake cookie is the butter and the milk and the cocoa and the sugar all mixed together and heat it up. You need to make sure that you're stirring it pretty frequently. Anytime you're dealing with liquefied sugar of any kind, the chances of it burning on the bottom of the pan are pretty high. Anytime you're working with milk, cooking, heating up milk, the chances of it scalding or burning on the bottom of the pan, pretty high. So you add both of them together, and guess what? You have to be pretty careful. We added a teaspoon of vanilla and a big old scoop of peanut butter, and it has a slightly creamier look to it. The color changed ever so slightly when we did that, and it is ready to add to the oats. And when you get it heated up to a boil, then you're supposed to boil it for 1 minute. However, that's where people kind of get in trouble, because the difference between the ruined no-bake cookies that I will be showing you later and the good batch of no-bake cookies is not very much time. And so I actually recommend cooking the no-bake cookies for ever so slightly less than a minute, depending on your stove and how hot your stove cooks. You just kind of have to play it by ear. What I ended up doing was making 4 different batches of cookies. I made some regular no-bake cookies that I overcooked for just a little too long, and I made some no-bake cookies that I made correctly. I made the fudge no-bake cookies, and I made a special modified recipe that I created for little kids, since no-bake cookies aren't necessarily super little kid friendly. This one is the fudge no-bake cookies. And so I have an easy fudge recipe. Calls for sweetened condensed milk and some chocolate chips. Super easy fudge recipe. So I'm gonna make that, and I'm gonna add the oatmeal to it and make no-bake fudge cookies. Smooth and creamy. It's all stirred up. We'll add some oats to it. Try number 2, because I ruined it the first time. This one is the normal, regular, turned out really well, no-bake cookies. Because this is Trying not to starve to death on good home cooking, not I know how to cook. Try number 2. The mixture should be slightly runny. It should look like it's maybe even a little bit too runny. That's the way it should look. When you put the cookies out on the wax paper, they should go out and kind of blah. Like, they shouldn't stay stiff. If they stayed, when you put the cookie out onto the wax paper, if it stays stiff, it's probably a little overcooked. The cookie needs to actually you can see it relax when you when you put a scoop of the cookie mixture down on the wax paper. If the cookie mixture is not relaxing a little once you put it down, it's overcooked. Well, overcooked in the way that it will be dry and crumbly. Some people like it a little bit like that. The cookie will firm up as it cools off. P-I-N-G-O, P-I-N-G-O. I don't know why I'm singing that. P-I-N-G-O. Because the recipe for no-bake cookies isn't particularly kid-friendly, I mean, you're dealing with hot sugar, and hot sugar, it burns, like really, really burns. And so it's something that isn't necessarily super young kid-friendly. And because of that, when my kids were little, I altered the recipe a little to be a little bit more kid-friendly. And so what I did was I would have them measure out the oats, and I would have them measure out about a cup of chips, chocolate chips, and a cup of peanut butter chips, and maybe some miniature marshmallows if they were interested, and they could add maybe some shredded coconut or other little chips, whatever you happen to have on hand. And they would mix them all up into the bowl and stir that up. To keep it consistent among all the different batches, I'm not going to add any of the extra other options, but they are things that we did add sometimes. We're just gonna do the chocolate and peanut butter. Then when the sugar is actually cooked and ready to pour in, then I would pour it in and stir it up. Sometimes I let the kids, when they got just a little bit older, stir the stuff with a very long handled spoon, but that hot sugar, even when it's added, it's not on the heat and it's added to the oats and the other things like that, it will still burn. You can't wait to put it on, to drop it onto the little wax paper. You have to do it when it's hot. And so pretty much working with that hot sugar at any point you just have to be extra careful when you're dealing with young kids. So I altered the recipe a little to make it a little bit more kid-friendly so that they had more things to do. And so I'm going to make the recipe that way so that you can see the difference between the actual recipe, the altered recipe, and just the fudge recipe. So these are the 4 different kinds of no-bakes that I made. This was the first batch. I overcooked it by 30 seconds. You can see that it is dry and crumbly. This is the batch I made with fudge, and it holds together pretty well, but it crumbles when you... This was the kid-friendly batch. It crumbles a little bit, but it does stay together a lot better. And this one is the regular batch, and I cooked it for about 55 seconds, and it holds together the best, and truthfully it's well-shaped, a well-shaped cookie, and you can kind of see how it was liquefied when you put it down, as opposed to, say, this one that just looks like a crumbly mess, and that one, which looks awfully dry. This one is pretty good though. I mean, it looks a little bit drier, but it is pretty good. My favorite of the bunch is definitely the normal regular recipe. The cookie looks the best and it holds together well. The interesting thing that I want you to notice though is that these were cooked for 55 seconds. Actually, it might have been 50 seconds and then 55 by the time I got to turn the burner off and pulled it off. I don't know. These were overcooked. These right here, the ones that turned out the worst, that are, you know, all got thrown away except for the 3 to show you, were overcooked by only 30 seconds. 30 seconds! That's how much time it takes to completely ruin your no-bake cookies. I'm not a fan of the fudge, but my son said don't throw these away, at least that he would eat them. They actually hold together pretty well. Even though they look a little bit more crumbly here, they hold together significantly better than the others. So there is a real time crunch at a certain point when you're cooking these. And if your no-bake cookies are turning out dry and crumbly, shorten the time that you cook the sugar. I have found that anything over a minute is way too long. And truthfully, a minute for me is too long only because it takes me a minute to turn the burner off, to put the timer off to the side and turn the timer off and move it off the heat, and even just those 5 seconds that it takes to do those kinds of things, 5-10 seconds, is too much time. And so if I cook it for like 50 seconds and then get those things done, it's still bubbling inside the pan, and so it's still cooking. And so that is the biggest reason why your no-bake cookies are probably turning out dry and crumbly, is because you're overcooking the butter, milk, sugar part. And I'm having a hot flash. Yeah, the normal regular no-bake cookies are definitely my favorite, and they turned out the best too. I still really love the kid-friendly version, and I would do that every time for kids about 5 and under, maybe even 6 and under, because of the burn risk. I'll see you next time on A Lolly Life. Yeah, I just opened my mouth for you with food in my mouth. That was really yucky.